also, now that I'm thinking through this,
Let me. Do you have your phone with you? Because I actually have one saved and it takes it to you.
One last thing, for Q&A, there's a mic in the center. Make sure that you have it off the mic.
now I'm, I'm learning, although I'm never doing this. It ain't gonna happen, but this will give people, if they're coming, it'll give them time to come.
We're good to go, by the way.
All right, awesome.
I
This is
sent
funny.
it to your
Okay.
email, to your number.
All right, can she see me? Yes. Hi. Okay. So, welcome to ICR, everybody. Yeah. People might be trickling in, but I'm just gonna sort of say some introductory things, and then I wanna introduce Gibbs Knotts and Brian Jones, who are the deans of the Schools of Humanities and Social Sciences at the Citadel and at the College of Charleston, respectively, to welcome you all. And also, those of you zooming in, I want to say hi to you. Welcome to ICR. So in 2018, when I first started thinking about this conference, I had no idea about how challenging it would be. I feel like I know all of you pretty well, both on Zoom and here in person. And I'm really encouraged by the fact that in one way or the other, we're all trying to reestablish our scholarly and, more importantly, I think, our human bonds. So this conference has been a labor of love, and I need to thank my committee members. I don't know if any of them are on Zoom right now, but Amy M. is here, and I want to thank her. She pulled this panel together and did an amazing job. Lauren Revelico, I think it's her little girl's birthday, but I'm going to thank her anyway. Jesslyn Collins-Froelich, who might be on Zoom, I'm not sure. Paula Feldman and Rebecca Nesbitt. I also want to thank my graduate assistant, Elizabeth Quarles, who is not here right now, and my interns, Deanna Cohen and Kiera Bohannon, who I will also thank at the banquet. She had to go home, but she'll be at the banquet. And she did a lot of work to make this happen. She made those programs that you guys all have. This program is sponsored by the South Carolina Humanities, which is a not-for-profit organization inspiring, engaging, and enriching South Carolinians with programs on literature, history, culture, and heritage. And this is a great example of that. Our other sponsors are, get ready, the Citadel Department of History and the Henry and Jenny Johnson Fund for Historical Studies, the College of Charleston, Carolina Low Country and Atlantic World Program, the College of Charleston School of Humanities and Social Sciences, the Citadel School of Humanities and Social Sciences, and their program in Modern Languages, Literatures, and Cultures, a bunch of departments from CFC, including the Department of English, History, Philosophy, Latin American and Caribbean Studies, German and Russian Studies, French, Francophone, and Italian Studies. Also, the College of Charleston's programs in Women's and Gender Studies, and they'll be sponsoring our Unbinding the Canon panel tomorrow, Film Studies, and International Studies. We are also grateful for the support of the Halsey Institute of Contemporary Art, where I hope you all will come with us tomorrow and check out their amazing exhibit, and the Barbados and the Carolinas Legacy Foundation, represented here by Ms. Rhoda Green. So, I'm going to hand it over to Dr. Jones and to Dr. Knotts, and they're going to welcome you in the name of our respective institutions. Yeah, Dr. Jones, you good?
It occurred to me about 30 seconds ago I didn't bring my readers, which is a new thing for me. Good evening. My name is Brian Jones. I serve as the Dean of the School of Humanities and Social Sciences at the Citadel, located just up the peninsula, and I bring greetings on behalf of General Glenn Walters, and our Provost, Sally Selden. I'm very glad to be here on behalf of that institution and to join with my colleagues from there, Dr. Knight, Dr. Hendricks, Dr. M, and others, as well as our new colleagues at the College of Charleston and the many other low country institutions represented on this dynamic panel which will follow. My thanks also to Dr. M for inviting me to make these very brief remarks. I suspect that her popularity among the ICR faithful will depend largely upon how brief my remarks in fact are. So it's difficult, I think, these days to come up with clever and funny things to say in the middle of a 2-year-long global pandemic, which has taken a very heavy toll on so many for so long. And it continues to disrupt and destroy the livelihoods of so many people around the world. So if you'll indulge me, I just want to offer 2 heartfelt sentiments in advance of the panel. First and most importantly, I'd like to offer my best wishes to each of you, to each of your families and friends, for your continued health and safety, for your wellness, your mindfulness, as well as my sincere hope that you continue to find joy in these very, very troubled times. And second, as an academic leader and as a historian, and I hope a successful advocate for the value of all of the humanities disciplines, please accept my deepest gratitude for your continued vigorous efforts to further our understanding of the human experience through the study of history, literature, music, film, art, and more. Without you, without your work, the world would be a sterile, boring, and terrifying place. In some places it already is. But however terrible this pandemic has been, this catastrophe has reinforced my belief in the power of the humanities to fortify the mind, the body, and the soul in a world increasingly driven by dollars, algorithms, and statistics. Our disciplines enrich the lived life, inspire the human heart and mind, and clarify that which is meaningful, and bind us together in a common human experience. It is exactly this bond, among others, which this conference seeks to address, beginning tonight with an exciting panel on Charleston and the bonds joining people, place, and time, and connecting what we were with what we aspire to be. My best wishes to each of you. Enjoy the conference. Thank you.
So Kathy just asked me to talk 3 minutes ago. So and whatever Kathy asked me to do, I do. So, but I'm very happy to be here. So I'm Gibbs Knotts. I'm Dean of Humanities and Social Sciences at the College of Charleston. I'm also a political science professor, and I certainly bring greetings on behalf of President Andrew Shue and Provost Suzanne Austin. I hope this panel in part will inspire you to get out and see our beautiful city. It is a wonderful city. I'm gonna be completely honest. It's been unbearably hot up until about 3 weeks ago, so you're here at a good time, and I hope you're able to get out and enjoy it. I guess what I wanted to say is just that what I probably like most about the College of Charleston is the way we have folks that are so committed to interdisciplinary approaches. I think you're going to see that on this panel. You certainly have people from a whole host of departments and perspectives just from the College of Charleston here at this conference. Kathy's such a great example of that. So not only is, there you go. So think about that, right? So not only does she do such great work in the English department, she pulled this conference together, but she spearheads our really exciting and rapidly growing medical humanities minor on campus that people are very, very excited about and students are really flocking to. And I think what unites so many of us is a love of learning, a commitment to our students, and a belief that the best questions are going to be addressed through multiple lenses and multiple perspectives. So again, greetings. I'm really excited about this panel, and I'll get out of the way and let you learn a little bit more about Charleston. So thank you.
just going to introduce our moderator for our welcome panel, Charleston Bound. I just wanted to say again that Amy M. conceptualized and organized this whole thing, which will, I hope, give you a historical, aesthetic, and cultural sense of the city in which you find yourself so that you can go out and explore and understand what you're seeing. Dr. Bernard Powers is professor, it's been a long day, emeritus of history at the College of Charleston. He is the founding director of the College of Charleston Center for the Study of Slavery in Charleston, and he's the lead academic liaison for the college's work with the university's Studying Slavery Consortium. He is the author of Black Charlestonians, A Social History, 1822 to 1885, and he co-authored We Are Charleston, Tragedy and Triumph at Mother Emanuel in 2016. His recent work includes a chapter on churches as places of history, the case of 19th century Charleston, South Carolina, in interpreting African American history and culture at museums and historic sites. So, Dr. Powers.
Well, good evening, everyone, and thank you all so very much for being here tonight, and thanks to Amy and Kathy for inviting me to be present and to moderate this important panel. So let's see, our panel tonight is entitled Encountering Ties Between the City's Past and Its Present. And it's somewhat unusual because this is a panel on which I know every one of the participants, and I'm very appreciative of the work that they are doing, and also their professionalism and their friendship. So thank you all panelists for being here tonight, and I'm gonna introduce everyone, and then after the introductions, I'm going to have some questions that I'm going to pose to the panel, and the panelists will respond individually. And we're going to start with our Zoom panelist, Christina. Hey, Christina. We're going to start with you. When we get to the questions, I'm going to first introduce you, along with the other people, and then we'll have our Q&A. Turn it over to Q&A, and I'm sure there'll be lots of exciting and insightful questions and answers. So let me begin with the introduction. So on the Zoom, we have Christina Butler, who is a professor of historic preservation and chair of general education at the American College of the Building Arts, as well as an adjunct professor at the College of Charleston and owner of Butler Preservation, LC. Beside Low Country at High Tide, she has written numerous National Register nominations, Ansonboro, From Birth to Rebirth for Historic Charleston Foundation, and several articles for Kiowa Legends. Butler researches the built environment and the role of enslaved artisans and builders in the Low Country, and also trains new interpreters for tour companies. So we've got Christina Butler on the Zoom. Next, we have Shannon Eves, and Shannon's right here on the end. Shannon Eves is an assistant professor of African American history at the College of Charleston, where she specializes in slavery, gender, and sexuality. At the College of Charleston, she sits on the executive board of the Center for the Study of Slavery in Charleston. Her current book project, Illicit Intercourse, Slavery and the Making of a Rape Culture in the Antebellum South, inserts enslaved women, rape, and sexual exploitation at the center of scholarly debate on power and culture in the Antebellum South. And she is currently a 2021-22 American Association of University Women Postdoctoral Research Fellow. So that's Shannon Green. Next we have Shannon Eves. Next, we have Rhoda Green. There, okay. And Rhoda is the Barbados Honorary Consul to South Carolina and a founder and CEO of the Barbados and the Carolinas Legacy Foundation, which serves to highlight research, archive, facilitate, and promote opportunities for Barbados-Carolina collaboration. She is a past board member and current programming committee member for the International African American Museum. And she currently serves as a board member of the South Carolina National Heritage Corridor. And most recently, she was interviewed for a PBS documentary by the Middleton Place Foundation, one of Charleston's iconic plantations with a Barbadian link. So Rhoda Green on the end there. Harlan Green is scholar in residence at the Addlestone Library at the College of Charleston and the chair of the City of Charleston's Historical Commission. He has served as Director of Special Collections at the college, Director of Archival and Reference Services at the Avery Research Center for African American History and Culture, and archivist, as well as Assistant Director of the South Carolina Historical Society. He is the author of fiction and nonfiction works, including Slave Badges and the Slave Hire System in Charleston, South Carolina, 1783 to 1865, as well as The Damned Don't Cry, They Just Disappeared, the life and works of Harry Hervey, published by the University of South Carolina Press in 2017. His book on Charleston LGBTQ history from indigenous pre-settlement days to 2010, the year of the first Pride March, is forthcoming in 2022. So Harlan right in the middle here. And Joseph Kelly, who is on the end, is Professor of Literature and the Director of Irish and Irish American Studies at the College of Charleston. His latest book, Marooned, reinterprets the Jamestown colony, shifting much of the credit for American democracy away from Plymouth Plantation and onto the ragtag castaway employees of the Virginia Company. His second book, America's Longest Siege, Charleston, Slavery, and the Slow March Toward Civil War, detailed the evolving ideology of slavery in America. And then his first book was a study of the Irish novelist James Joyce, Censorship, Obscenity, and the Cold War. And the title is Our Joyce, From Outcast to Icon. He currently edits the popular series, The Seagull Book of Poems, Stories, Plays, and Essays for the publisher W.W. Norton. And right now, he's busy at work on a book about free speech, fascism, and the invention of liberal democracy. Obviously a very timely subject. And then finally, right here, is Dr. Felice Knight, who is an assistant professor in the Department of History at the Citadel. She specializes in African American history with an emphasis on slavery during the early national and antebellum periods. She received an MA in history from the Joint Master's Program at the Citadel and the College of Charleston, and a PhD in African American history from the Ohio State University. Knight is chair of the Citadel's University Studying Slavery Committee, chair of a subcommittee on building names for the Citadel's Presidential Task Force on Race, Diversity, and Inclusion, and also immediate past chair of the History and Culture Subcommittee of the City of Charleston's Commission on Equity, Inclusion, and Racial Conciliation. So those are our panelists. Let's just give them a warm welcome. And again, we thank you all for being here. for our session entitled Encountering Ties Between the City's Past and Present, with a focus on Charleston. So now we're going to move to our questions, and I'm going to start with Christina, and then we're going to go to Shannon and Rhoda, and then we'll come over to the other table here. We'll go to Felice and right on down. Okay. Okay. All right. Very good. So, our first question is this. If you had time to only visit one place in Charleston that illustrates our bonds with our troubled past, what would it be? So if you had time to only visit one place in Charleston that illustrates our bonds with our troubled past, what would that place be? And so Christina, we'll start with you. And let's just add one element. Just explain why you made that choice, why you make that choice. So Christina, we'll begin with you.
Are you able to hear me?
Yes, yes.
Wonderful. Well, it's always a toss-up between a rural and an urban site, but I have to say about plantation, mostly because that site was occupied not only by the enslaved, but by their descendants well up until almost the beginning of the 20th century. So thinking of ties and lasting bonds, that site continued to be a racially important and dynamic site for well over 250 years.
Okay, very good, very good. Thank you. So Shannon, we'll move on to you and Rhoda.
I have good evening, everyone. I have so many places that I could think of, and as I was ruminating on this question, I came up with the market downtown, and for a couple of reasons. Because as a child growing up in South Carolina, I always heard this cultural lore that the market, where people, tourists and even locals go and shop, and it's a nice gathering place with restaurants and things like that, was where enslaved people used to be sold in Charleston. And, I kind of remember my life before hearing that, and then my life after hearing that, because, I'm, again, from South Carolina, and so I used to always love going there and getting ice cream, and my family would come down here. And then I heard that, and I was like, I don't ever want to go there. I just remember being really, super angry about that. And then it wasn't until I became a historian by trade that that I learned that was not, in fact, this primary site where enslaved people were sold in Charleston. That actually most of the auctioning took place many times even in the street or in alleys along East Bay Street and in various other places that. So that anecdote, just the reason why I say the market is because that anecdote in and of itself, illustrates not only the history of spaces, but also the ways in which we are taught about spaces. So the memory of spaces, and how there can often be quite a disconnect between those two things. And so it's, only as a professional, a scholar of slavery, that, and I also have to take this opportunity to nod my hat to my predecessor at the College of Charleston, Dr. Powers, who I feel like is way more qualified to probably be a panelist on this subject. But, it's in reading, his work, that I, gained a greater understanding of the market as, being just that, a place where people sold goods. And many of those people who sold goods were enslaved women. And so, I look at that when I go there now, again, having, coming, and I'm able to recognize how my understanding of that space has changed over time. I see it as, obviously it is still a fraught space because it is a place where enslaved people were forced to labor. But I also think of it as a place where enslaved women probably gathered, and that's where they were able to talk about their day-to-day, concerns and their feelings, and a place where they gathered to share information. And even if just for a brief moment, were perhaps not under the constant surveillance of their owners. And so, I think that it is a space that, it can reveal so much to us about not only capitalism and the relationship between slavery and capitalism, but also the enslaved people's experience when we're able to do a really deep dive and really kind of understand, what the space is. And I also can just testify to the fact that my own understanding of what the market is one that, many South Carolinians still hold. I mean, I'm sure, Dr. Powers, that you've, been confronted with people believing that it was like, that it wasn't a marketplace, but it was a slave marketplace.
Right.
So.
Okay, great. And Rhoda?
First, let me say thanks for the invitation to sit and to contribute to this international conference. There are so many things, and I guess that's the reason why you've asked for one thing. So that's right. Here's my stab at it. I would say that Charleston Landing is a good place to start. Here's why. There's so many things about Charleston that get you thinking, and you start asking questions. I say that from the vantage point of a person who came from Barbados and relocated to Charleston. Why I would say Charleston Landing is because in recent time, and I think it was just recently in the space of time, that they erected a museum. Actually, it was after Hurricane Hugo destroyed what was there. But the museum that is there orients anyone who is interested in history or who is interested in knowing about what makes Charleston, this area, historic. You get a good understanding of the background, what happened, how people from Europe, from Britain, enslaved people who were from Africa, how they actually were taken to Barbados, and the whole structure, the whole system, the whole model that was devised and then transplanted here. So there are layers, one upon the other, and every strand of the history is pointed to. So one can become very overwhelmed by all of these aspects, all of these threads of connection. And so, as a place where one can become oriented and kind of get an understanding of the importance, the historical importance of this place, I would say Charlestown Landing is the place for every visitor to start learning about Charleston and understanding the history of Charleston.
Okay, very good. So we'll come right to the police.
Okay, so when I thought about this question, I cheated a little. I'm going to say the Battery, but there are two specific locations on the Battery where I would say one has to visit to understand bonds with our troubled past, and that is White Point Gardens at the Battery, where there is a monument called the Confederate Defenders of Charleston Monument, and then also along the actual Battery. The Battery is like a promenade for those of you who are unfamiliar with the Battery. And it was an old defensive seawall to protect the city because it borders the place, the end of the peninsula where the Ashley and the Cooper rivers meet. And so there's a portion along that promenade where there's a plaque recognizing the 54th Massachusetts Regiment that participated in the assault in Fort Wagner. And they, of course, were an African-American regiment during the Civil War. But it's these two spots that really are juxtaposed against each other, and in a very dynamic way that's deeply troubling. Firstly, the Confederate Defenders Monument is huge. It's humongous. Now, as a work of art, it's amazing. It really is. But the meaning behind it, erected in 1932 by the United Daughters of the Confederacy with a donation from, I believe, Andrew Buse Murray, specifically to erect a sculpture to those Confederate soldiers who, as he said, defended the city. But we understand that the Confederacy basically took over the city from the United States of America. That's, what happened. And so to have those two, this large monument, the plaque it's fairly long, but it's low in a sense to the ground. Well, not low to the ground, but it's on that wall. And many people don't see it. So I think that it's important to visit a site like that. And the plaque was put there in, I think, 2016. Harlan, you might correct me on that one. I think that there needs to be a better balance and an emphasis on the United States soldiers who fought and gave their lives to get this city and this state back into the hands of the United States of America. So I'll stop there, but that's a place where I say you ought to go.
Okay, very good.
Well, I'm the deadbeat that didn't get the questions beforehand, so spontaneity is going to be me, and hopefully brevity. When I try to explain Charleston to people, it is a visually beautiful place. And the analogy that I often make is, it's like meeting a beautiful, lovely old woman, and you want to believe this wistful beauty. Henry James said that she was wistful. There's no more, and Owen Wister follows up, saying that there's no more wistful beauty in the United States. And she is beautiful, but interpreting this woman, you have to realize that she's had this very savage and this very, she's kind of been bled out to this pastel beauty, but she really did have a very, very violent blood red past. And so then to do it visually, I would actually choose, and I'm surprised at my choice, there's a museum house in the city of Charleston called the Aiken-Rhett House. It's the only house museum that docents don't take you through. You can wander around on your own. but to some extent, it's a urban plantation. And it gives you, in one site, the incredible contrast between the beauty and the ugliness, because you have this great antebellum mansion owned by a governor of the state who traveled abroad, built a marble art gallery, and truly on the other side of the wall is where the enslaved people lived. And it is to some extent like Miss Habersham. You can actually go see the carriages still sitting in the carriage house. The two old ladies locked the rooms as they get older and older, and most of the house was not lived in, until they died in the 1970s or 80s. So you do get the concept of time there, but then you also get the incredible dichotomy of the grandeur that lived on one side and the enslavement that lived on the other.
Okay, Joe Kelly.
Thank you. First of all, thanks to Kathy and Amy for inviting me to be on this incredibly distinguished and interdisciplinary panel. This is the best kind of panel, I think, you ever put together for a conference. You have people from such different backgrounds. And for those of you who don't know, very much the most distinguished person on the panel is the man giving questions as opposed to giving his opinions. Bernie his stature is unmatched in Charleston. Felice, you kind of, I'm glad I picked two places because you picked one. and I can't hesitate. I have to like overlap with you a little bit just to say when I moved here in 1992 from Texas, and I went down to the Battery, and I saw this magnificent sculpture. By the way, you could just change the name to the World War II veterans of Charleston. It's Greek warriors and things like that. We could very easily fix that statue. I saw the defender. I forget exactly what the inscription is, but I just read it and I thought, oh my God, Charleston is so progressive. They are the defenders of Fort Sumter are being. There's a monument to them here, thinking this was Captain Anderson and the Union defenders of. I very quickly became disabused of that notion of the grand old lady and her points of view. So the way I approach this question, I thought maybe this is advice for people who are from out of town coming to this conference. And my other place that I would pick is just walk down the street. Just walk straight down Calhoun Street until you come to Mother Emanuel Church. If we're trying to link the past to the present, that is the place, that was the one place I would send you. Because you have to stand outside with the incredible reverence for that, what has become probably the most sacred place in Charleston because of the event 6 years ago. In the alcove on the street, poke your head into the little, there's just a little space underneath the staircase. Poke your head in there and you're going to see a very kind of, I would say, a humble monument to Denmark Vesey, who was executed in 1822 for plotting a staged rebellion here in Charleston. And that is one of the reasons why, I'm not wanting to say his name, but the perpetrator of this horrible crime picked Mother Emanuel Church for his crime. That I think, if there's one place you want to go, I would say you cannot leave Charleston without walking down there and seeing these two places. Because what happened in 1822 has direct, unbroken line, not broken by the Civil War, not broken by the Civil Rights Acts of 1964 and 1965, not broken by anything till 2015, and still not broken, today.
Great, thank you. So let's go on to another question. And again, Christina, we're going to start with you. And panelists, you all are engaged in engaging the public in various ways, teaching, research-related service, telling people about the connections between South Carolina, Charleston in particular, and Barbados. In every way, you all are involved in educating, teaching, instruction, and so on. So would you all in turn tell us about a recent success or failure, success or failure that you all have encountered as you have tried to transform the traditional narrative about a monument or a place or an event? Success or failure that you've had. And Christina, we'll start with you.
Absolutely. So I also want to say thank you, Harlan, because we could only pick one important site, and Aiken-Rhett was my runner-up. So I'm glad you mentioned that one. So I'll keep it on a happy note and mention two short recent successes. First, City of Charleston, as some of the other panelists mentioned, has no shortage of monuments and historic signage. And in the last, I'd say 5-ish years, there's been a real push to put up more commemorative signs and plaques for the city's African and African American history. Good example would be the Robert Smalls historic marker at the Battery, which is right next to historic Charleston Foundation headquarters. And it gives tour guides the opportunity to not just talk about the first shots of the Civil War and the big, beautiful houses, but to tell a more comprehensive or inclusive version of the city's history. And I've been really excited to see tour guides embrace that story and almost skip the big mansions and instead give this fabulous story of slavery to freedom. Similarly, through Harlan and other panelists' work with the city's Historic Commission, there's a real movement to add plaques. And Historic Charleston Foundation and Preservation Society both have given tentative interest in sponsoring new signage of two important African-American sites in the East Side. One, the former site of the church that Denmark Vesey attended, that was then an important African-American burial ground that was developed, and the other, potentially a historic marker in Hampstead Mall, just giving history of that neighborhood from the 1760s to the present. My other quick recent success is I've been a tour guide now for about 18 years, and when I first started, I got a lot of pushback from tourists and other tour guides about talking about enslaved history and how it was just too depressing of a story. And not only are more tour guides, walking, carriage, and bus embracing that, but one of the carriage companies recently actually set up a special education session, asked me to come in and talk about the role of enslaved people in our built environment. And that was voluntary, and the reason he had asked for that was because he's finding more and more tourists, Black and white, are wanting to hear that story. And the tour guides were really excited about it, and there wasn't the pushback and the discomfort there would have been not that long ago. And y'all, I am going to apologize because I'll have to jump off and get on a plane, but it was an absolute honor to be a part of the beginning of the panel. So thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you.
May I have your attention, please?
Okay, Shannon, we'll go to you next.
I think I thought a lot about this question, and I'll say that I'm still undecided about you know, what I want to say, because I think that, you know, even, you know, and you did add to the question success or failure.
Yes.
The original iteration said success, and so I think, you know, the first thing that comes to mind would be the removal of the John C. Calhoun statue in Marion Square, which is a park, a green space at the corners of Calhoun Street and King Street in Meeting. And this statue, for those of you who might be new to Charleston and you know, didn't have an opportunity to come here before it was removed last year, was, well, actually, I think at Yes, last year it was 2020, because we were, I've lost a year.
Yeah.
In pandemic time, my whole timeline of recalling events is off, but it was removed last year, and so, but for those of you who can picture it, this was perhaps the tallest dwelling in the city of Charleston skyline, and to connect with what Joe said, was quite literally loomed over Mother Emanuel Church, which was less than half a block, away from where it stood. And so, you know, there have obviously been calls for this statue to be removed, not just for decades, but the better part of a century. And, you know, I think about the fact that there used to be a smaller version of the Calhoun statue that was erected in the late 19th century, I believe. And even Black people in Charleston protested its presence even back then. And one of the reasons why they created a new statue and placed it so high in the air was to try to cut down on the vandalism that was taking place to the statue by people out of protest. So, you know, the point is that, you know, Black people from the time that the statue was erected understood that this was not about memorialization, but that this statue was about sending the message that the same ideologies of white supremacy and Black subjugation that were being fought for by John C. Calhoun were intended to stay. You know, that the message was that, you know, those principles and those ideologies were here to stay and to serve as a constant reminder that you have a place and that you need to stay in that place. You're going to be reminded of that every time you walk through the very heart of this city. And so, you know, I think obviously for me, you know, it has, you know, I have felt a shift in not having to, I mean, my office, you know, if I had a straight shot, you know, I could, you know, I probably could have seen it directly, because my office itself was less than a block away from the statue. And, you know, I can remember being, you know, stood out there for hours as they cut down the statue, and definitely felt a sense of success, and that we were, you know, moving in the right direction. But to bring up but to tap into the sense of failure sometimes that often comes after that initial high, I thought about the fact that my office still sits on Calhoun Street, and that, you know, there are still people who are, you know, very upset about the fact that that statue came down, and still just don't, or unwilling to understand, and, you know, and to not just, and are unwilling, I guess, to explore the origins of the narrative that they were taught about what these monuments meant, you know, and that there's not, and that there hasn't been space for them to actually, you know, or they haven't taken the time to actually have an understanding that, again, there's history as a memory, you know, there's a history of how history is told, and there's a history of how history is remembered, and that these statues, when they were erected in the late 19th century, early to mid 20th century, that even the people who dedicated these statues were very frank about the fact that these statues represented white supremacy, that they represented black subjugation. You know, when the, Daughters of the Confederacy were erecting these, again, the politicians that they invited to dedicate them, they said these things out of their own mouths. So we're not, as historians and even as activists, we're not inventing, we're not making up the fact that, these statues are not just, or these monuments are not purely about memorialization, but that they intended to serve a purpose in that particular moment in time. And so, that's where the failure, I think, for me kind of comes in, is that, people there's an unwillingness to kind of divest oneself from the lore and the myths, the lost cause kind of narrative, and to even take a real historical, gain a real historical understanding of the particular time and place and the things that were happening at the time and place that many of these monuments were put up in the first place.
Okay, Rhoda?
Okay. I would say that from my perspective, I would refer to an incident that occurred sometime back when I jumped into this whole Barbados-Carolina connection and all of the implications. I remember visiting a site, and I was introducing a book called The Barbados-Carolina Connection to the person in charge of the site. And after the introduction, I met one of the staff members or one of the workers at this site at what was then Piggly Wiggly on Sam Rittenberg Boulevard. And the young lady told me, Miss Rhoda, our person in charge, our director, called a staff meeting after you visited the site and said that here's a lady who was saying that the persons who settled Barbados, or who settled Carolina from Barbados, they weren't Barbadians, they were British. So the message was, beware, the history that she is telling you about is not as it is. So I was very thankful. And at my second visit, I brought up the topic about those British settlers from Barbados who ultimately settled the Carolinas and brought everything with them, the whole idea of a plantation society, and implemented it here. I said to the director of the place, could you imagine? They call themselves Barbadians. And here's why. Because based on sugar and what it produced and the wealth that it produced, they became very wealthy and became very important to the English British government at the time. And in order to identify themselves and set themselves apart from everyone else, they call themselves Barbadian. Okay, the takeaway from that for me was, here you have history being told, but it's being told from different vantage points. And people are seeing it, and they're telling it, they're living it, and they're experiencing it from their own silo, from the way they want it to be. Never did he and many others ever talked about the enslaved people who were brought over with those who settled the Carolinas. Many of them came from Barbados and from the other Caribbean islands. And they had an integral place in the development, the settlement. And what was more important than the personage who came and settled, it is what they honed in Barbados, that whole system that dominated everything that occurred here in Charleston, in South Carolina, and to a large degree along the eastern seaboard. So the idea is that history is told and it is perceived and it's propagated from the vantage point of those who made and constructed the system. And that to me was a very, very telling part of what transpires here in Charleston. And in terms of the failure, I think the failure is across the board. And one of the things that I've learned, not as a lettered historian, but as someone who realizes that each individual, whether they study history, they're part of history, they're living history. And it is very informative if you can understand the system within which you're born and how that system affects you day in and day out. When you have that sort of control and you have that understanding, I think you're better informed to deal with the eventualities that are unfolding each and every day. And the takeaway or the failure is that we're not teaching our kids, or maybe it is now coming into the forefront, that you're part of history, and the stories that are not told, it's incumbent upon you to underscore them and to lift them up. That is something that we each must take responsibility for. So that is part of why I feel so connected to the Low Country, because of that connection and pulling those strands apart and seeing how this whole construction here and how what is fleshed out, the lived experience, how it is tied to a lot of precedents from the past.
Okay, very good. And you know, I added failure, but you don't have to talk about success and failure. You can talk about either one of those. So Felice will go right here.
So, what I had prepared to talk about is an initiative that I have the pleasure of being involved in on the Citadel's campus. I'm a member of the Citadel's Truth, Racial Healing, and Transformation Center team. We are one of 10 universities back in 2017 to receive a special grant from American Association of Colleges and Universities to establish a Truth, Racial Healing, and Transformation Center. The premise of Truth, Racial Healing, and Transformation Centers are to bring people of differing backgrounds into dialogue with each other, to have personal, intimate conversations, not necessarily about race, but about who they are as people. Because the thought leader behind the concept of Truth, Racial Healing, and Transformation Centers, her name is Dr. Gail Christopher, who was CEO of, or who was the director of diversity for W.K. Kellogg Company for a long time. Dr. Christopher says that we have to jettison the hierarchy of human value. That's really what is going on, regardless of whether we're talking about racism or sexism or any other ism. It's some of us choosing to place a hierarchy of value on certain humans over others. And that's what we have to get rid of. So the success is just first that the Citadel has the center, because the Citadel has a very complicated and troubled past in relation to race. Founded in 1842, right here in the city of Charleston, in a building that was erected in immediately after the 1822 Denmark-Vesey plot. The building was an arsenal designed to provide a place to store arms and a place for guards to dwell in case of another attempted insurrection. That building was later, the state later gave control of that building to the South Carolina Military Academy, which became the Citadel in 1842. So it has that history. Also, Citadel cadets participated in the firing on the Star of the West at the beginning of, right before the beginning of the Civil War in January of 1861. And lastly, the Citadel itself did not desegregate until 1966, and my very own father was a part of the early desegregating classes, Dr. Larry Ferguson, class of 1973. All of these things make our institution a prime candidate for that particular grant. And what we've done successfully with it is we have hosted what are called sit-listen sessions. The official name are RX Racial Healing Circles, but on a military campus, we just didn't think people would want to come to an RX Racial Healing Circle. So we chose sit-listen to brand it with our sit prefix. And they've been successful in bringing together faculty of differing backgrounds, students of differing backgrounds, staff members, and we're not 100% sure what the outcome is quite yet, because we've only been doing these sit-listen sessions for a couple of years. But outside of the Citadel, we're also partnering with the city of Charleston. We're training people within the city of Charleston to perform these RX Racial Healing Circles to facilitate them. So I consider that to be a major success, especially from an institution with such a fraught history in relation to race. And I look forward to continuing to work with that team in the years to come.
Great.
Well, I'll briefly put ditto marks under what Felice just said. The College of Charleston is involved in something as that as well, not quite as developed, also with the charged racial history that we have. But I'll maybe talk about two things that are in process. Our marine lab is named after a man who shall not be named, but who truly had a racist past. And he was the one that took the College of Charleston out of being a municipal college and made it private to avoid integration. And then he also was misogynistic, homophobic across the board. So there is a monument to him. And we just recently had a meeting yesterday. They talk about, the traditions that he upheld. And we thought we were going to answer this monument. What were those traditions? So we're not going to be ad hominem. We're basically going to say the traditions that the college once held about being, lily white and whatever, holding these things. These are not our traditions today. We are in that process of doing that right now. Come back, hopefully by next year, I'll have an answer whether that was successful or not. And and I'll be brief as well too, one of the monuments that I would like to see in the city of Charleston or on the College of Charleston campus changed as well is, certainly slavery is our ancestral sin here, but our gracious old lady has done a lot of sinning in her past. And there are a lot of minorities that have been disenfranchised and have no monuments. And I think we can all feel, and there are many African American men have gone on the record of talking about what it was like crossing Citadel Green and seeing this large monument of John C. Calhoun lowering down on them. I'm specifically now involved in LGBTQ history in the city of Charleston. And though it's interesting, there were LGBTQ people in this area, the Native Americans, the indigenous, long before the Europeans came. And it was the Europeans who came with their ideas about, binary status. So on the College of Charleston campus, there is a small little memorial to two gentlemen, one named John Ziegler, the other one named Edwin Peacock, who ran a bookstore in a building that was now it once was a private residence, now has been subsumed into the College of Charleston. One born about 1912, the other one born about the same time too. Edwin Peacock, by the way, if you're all familiar with the writer Carson McCullers, Edwin Peacock introduced Carson McCullers to her husband. He is the, if you're familiar with The Heart is a Lonely Hunter, The Deaf Mute in the Center, John Singer, that is based on Edwin Peacock. So these were two gay men in the city of Charleston who were out in the 1940s, who were members of the Interracial League, who made sure that their bookstore was integrated, who were very visible. And one of the gentlemen, who died at 103 a few years ago, had given the college lots of money, millions of dollars for musical scholarships. The college, while John Ziegler was still alive, erected a monument in front of this building thanking John Ziegler, that his family house had been taken by the state, but yet he was generous enough to give money to the College of Charleston, and they mentioned his business partner, Edwin Peacock. And this was put up by our College of Charleston building people, our boards of trustees, maybe 5 or 6 years ago, and the fact that they're gelding history, literally talking about them as partners, but not allowing them to be life partners, but only business partners. And I see our number is 20% of our students identify as LGBTQ on our campus, and there are two memorials in the city of Charleston that reference any kind of LGBTQ history. One is the Holocaust Monument. The irony that we have a Holocaust monument in the city of Charleston, before we have a slavery monument. And I can say this because my parents were Holocaust survivors, and they talk about Jews as being part of, the people who were exterminated, and gay people. And the other monument is to a very famous transsexual from the city of Charleston who fought a lot of racial prejudice marrying a black man. And the plaque on her house calls her a hermaphrodite instead of a transsexual. So I think these are some of the issues that facing in the city of Charleston.
Joe?
And I just want to maybe put a footnote on the John C. Calhoun Monument. Definitely, what a big win that was for us, long overdue. But the John C. Calhoun Monument came down because George Floyd was murdered that summer. That's why it came down. The battle flag of the Army of Northern Virginia, that most potent symbol of white supremacy, finally came down off the Capitol grounds in Columbia because of Mother Emanuel. So these are success stories, but what a price was paid for these successes. Let us hope we don't need another price paid like that to take down the monument down at White Point Gardens to the Confederate defenders. We just have to remember this work is, whatever victories we've had, there is a lot more to do, because what is very encouraging about the John C. Calhoun Monument was that the city of Charleston finally decided to stand up to the state legislature. Those of you who are from out of state don't know the details, and I won't go into the details of the politics, but anti-democratic rules were written into what's called the Heritage Act in South Carolina to prevent any Confederate monuments from coming down. And the city of Charleston finally said, well, we're going to test you. We're going to take it down, and you do something about it. And found out, I think, that the legislature was really bluffing. They didn't have the guts to really fight it. But that law is still on the books today. So there is still built into South Carolina law mechanisms to prevent the majority from making decisions about monuments, about historical stories in this state.
Let's make sure that we have an opportunity for our audience to pose some questions to the panelists. So if you have a question, would you please come to the microphone right here and speak into the mic, and let us know whether it's for the whole panel or for an individual on the panel to respond to. Anyone have a question that you would like to pose? Just come right on up. And while you're perhaps kind of contemplating and thinking about this, let's just go a little further with our formal questions, and let's ask this. So, what's the most effective ways? What are the most effective ways of truth-telling and narrative transformation when it comes to the city of Charleston today, the most effective ways of truth-telling and narrative transformation, and who should be involved in this work. And let's have, just in the interest of time, because we only have a little bit of time left, let's have relatively short answers. What's the best way to accomplish truth-telling and narrative transformation, and who should be involved in this? Is this a role for government? And if it is a role for government, how? Community organizations, faith institutions, universities, school boards, representatives of school districts. Who should be involved? And what's the most effective way of encouraging and accomplishing truth-telling? Well, someone, let's see, I think it might have been Christina who unfortunately had to leave us, but I think it might have been, she mentioned McLeod Plantation. And this is what I've seen, and I have an experience with Charleston that goes back to the middle 1970s, although I've only lived here since the early 90s. And Joe, I didn't realize we came the same year, 92. And when I came here in 75 and took the boat ride out to Fort Sumter, and the park ranger they give you a little orientation as you go out to Fort Sumter, where the first shots of the war were fired onto the fort. And at this time, they would explain why the Civil War came about and all the factors and everything. And so the park ranger talked about the role of tariffs and talked about the role of states' rights and talked about the different cultural differences between North and South and this, that, and the other. And not a single word about slavery. Not a single word. Now, this is 1975. That's changed. It's changed dramatically since then. And one of the reasons that kind of silence has changed in Charleston and in the South in a number of places is a result of consumer demand. The people who, and Christina said this, the people who go to, I think it was Christina, the people who go to these places now, and we're talking about white as well as African Americans, they come, they're more informed, they're more well-read, they pose questions, and when they go to the plantation site, they want to know about the majority of people who live in those places and worked in those places. And so, in part, we see a more complete story. We see greater truth-telling in some of these places, a lot of these places, because it's in response to consumer demand and because the patrons demand it. Yes, and please come right up to the mic. Thank you.
Hi, it was a great panel. Thank you so much. I really got a lot out of it. I came in last night and took an Uber into town, and I was thinking about what, I forget your name, I'm sorry.
Shannon East.
Shannon. I was thinking about what you said about making a link between slavery and capitalism and markets, different forms of markets. So I'm driving in with the Uber driver, I'm talking with the Uber driver who is black and he had lived here his whole life. And I was asking him questions and stuff, and he said, well, I used to live right over here. That's actually where I used to live. And as we're driving down the highway, and I go, oh, okay. And he says, he goes, I got out of there. You wouldn't want to live there. It's a bad neighborhood. Don't go there. And then he said, well, this neighborhood over here is getting better. And I said, wait, getting better, you mean like what? And he said, I mean, it looks better. The crime is better. I said, but does anybody that used to live there live there? And he said, no. And I said, yeah, they all had to move out, right? I mean, there was gentrification. It's like, what's happening? And so, Mike, that's a long wind-up question to ask I'm not a historian, I'm a literary scholar, right? So I want to ask the question about the relationship between history, telling the truth about the past, and telling the truth about the present. and about the role of what's happening in cities, because I come from a small regional campus from a large university, the one you graduated from, and I teach at OSU Newark, which is a small city, right? But it's completely devastated, and they have a revitalization plan, which means gentrification, which means they want to kick the people that have been living there, especially the poor and people of color and whatever, out in order to make this possible, to make it more beautiful, et cetera. And I'm sure that according to the Uber driver, that's happening or happened in Charleston. And I'm wondering about this relationship between history and telling the truth, but like taking it farther so that we're telling the truth about the present as well as the past.
Great question. Yeah.
And then Harlan, too.
Okay, yes,
I'm
please,
pretty
Ms.
sure
Harlan.
we wanted to jump on that. So real quick, I just finished serving on the City of Charleston Special Commission on Equity, Inclusion, and Racial Conciliation. I was chair of the History and Culture Subcommittee, but really another committee dealt more with the gentrification. It was our Housing and Transportation team. And I will never forget a comment from, it was actually the chair of our Internal Review Committee. This gentleman works in the City of Charleston, and he kept lamenting, he's very well educated, he has multiple degrees, but he kept lamenting about the fact that he cannot afford to live where he works. And this is so true. I lived in Columbus, Ohio. This is purely anecdotal, but I lived in Columbus, Ohio for 12 years, 7 of that getting the PhD. And when I moved back, I literally said, where have all the black people gone?
Oh, yeah.
And that's completely anecdotal and honest, but it's true because I grew up West Ashley, which is a part west of the Ashley River, and there are very few African American neighborhoods anymore. Most African Americans cannot afford to live, not just in the city proper, but in the suburbs near the city. And so this is a very real reality in this city. And it's something that several of the committees provided some recommendations to address, and hopefully the City of Charleston will take us up on those. Go ahead, Harlan.
Just a very brief riff, maybe to answer your question, also what you were talking about, Bernie, what's going to change things? Felice and I are from Charleston, and I'm sorry, I don't know, Shannon, if you're from Charleston or
I'm
not.
from Columbia.
Okay, but, so the best brains here, present company excluded, are not from Charleston. Charleston has drawn its outsiders. The irony that we're seesawing on is the irony that has brought outsiders in here. They're the ones who are shifting, whether they're living here, coming from somewhere else, whether they're tourists. Tomorrow, Felice at noon is talking about slavery at the Charleston Orphan House, specifically for Charleston tour guides, et cetera, so the tour guides can do it too. So we are benefiting from outsiders coming in, ratcheting up the intelligence, bringing more sophistication, but at the same time, we are paying a penalty because they have more money than we do, they are buying up the houses, and the city is now becoming a service economy for them, for tourists and not for people. So it's a real irony, that we're on now. Finally Charleston is moving from the past, getting its hidebound parochialism, bring outsiders in. But once those outsiders come in, they see what's here and they want to buy it and own it too. So it's a very odd dichotomy that we're experiencing.
The other irony is that we're building an international African American museum in downtown Charleston. And what we've just talked about here, the fact that we're getting more signage and recognition for African Americans in the history and development of the city of Charleston, but the black population in the city of Charleston it's declining. And downtown it is dramatically
And that's what
declining.
black public housing was
Yeah.
at one point.
Exactly right.
If you're
Exactly
tearing down black housing to build a museum about the black experience.
Yeah.
Public housing projects right in that area.
Yeah. Well, unfortunately, our time is up. But let's just thank our distinguished panel tonight, Christina Butler in her absence, Shannon Eves, Rhoda Green, Harlan Green, Joseph Kelly, and Felice Knight. Thank you all so very much. And audience, thank you all so very much for being here tonight too, and enjoy the rest of the conference. Have a good evening. Great. Thank you all. Thank you all very, very much. This was just great. Just fabulous.
Yes, thank you.
We had to handicap you to keep it the same.